I just wanted to start this podcast episode with a little bit of a footnote. Today we have Linda Pransky of Pransky and Associates. Linda has had a great impact on my life. So when I brought her on and I introduced her, it made me incredibly emotional. Though you might not be surprised because I'm willing to be emotional on the podcast. I did want to say, throughout the podcast, Linda is incredibly deep and she often references the impersonal mind. And in our work, because she and I both share the same understanding of how the mind works, we reference the personal mind versus the impersonal mind. I just don't tend to use the phrase impersonal mind much, so that's why I wanted to share this footnote with you and give you a little bit of an understanding of what that means. So the personal mind is everything that we think, right? All of our conclusions about life and conclusions that we've drawn about ourselves, our opinions, our judgments, right? Our little thinky mind, right? And when we talk about the impersonal mind, that's that deeper wisdom that's inside all of us. And why we say it's impersonal is because it's a wisdom that's available to every single person. It's not common sense that we all tap into to where we all have the same ideas about something. It's unique to us, common sense, right? Unique to the moment, right? Wisdom always meets the moment, as I say in my work with people. But when we talk about impersonal mind, I know for me, early on in my journey, that kind of would get me a little bit confused. What does impersonal mind mean? And ultimately, in my attempt to kind of help you get a little more clear on it before jumping into this episode, impersonal mind is that deeper intelligence, that guidance from within that all of us experience when the mind settles, when the mind quiets. You might see this as like being on a walk or being in the shower or being on a long drive, and all of a sudden you have a realization about something. You have an insight, right? That kind of shifts your understanding about yourself and about your life or about the circumstances that you're in, right? So that information that comes from a deeper place, that deeper sense of self, that true self, the place of who we truly are underneath the noise of our thought and feeling experience. So when Linda references impersonal mind, she's talking about that wonderful guidance, that wonderful unconditional peace that comes from knowing that that space exists and that it guides us. Okay. It's a very beautiful, touching conversation. I hope you enjoy. Hi, everyone, and welcome back to What Moves You with Jessie. Today, I am so giddy. Today, I am joined by a dear, it's going to make me emotional, a dear person in my life. Pull it together, Jess. I am joined by a wonderful woman named Linda Pransky, who has had such an impact on my life, and she probably doesn't even know it. Let alone her having a significant role in helping me stay clear on the path of this understanding that I share with you here. The understanding of how the mind works, the three principles understanding. As many of you know, my listeners, I had a huge realization into where my suffering was coming from when I was deeply depressed. And Elsie Spittle, who I've also had on the podcast, she has suggested to me that I continue to be mentored by mind, by my own wisdom, because she was so kind of impacted by the fact that I had arrived to this understanding in such an organic way. As a result of that, I ended up not, hiring any coaches, going to any workshops by her suggestion, because she wanted me to take, as the kids would say these days, she wanted me to raw dog life. But as a result of that, she what I would do in times when I felt really pinched and gripped and felt like I knew the experience I was in was as a result of thought. Sometimes I would need a little boost as far as hearing truth from some wonderful teachers, and Linda Pransky was one of them. Linda has a way of articulating what's going on the inside for all of us in such a clear and simple and to the point direct way that I have always loved. She has a wonderful sense of humor and just says it straight. I have this wonderful opportunity to be in a group called Tea and Cookies that she has put together for coaches, facilitators, and therapists who are interested and continue to implement this understanding through their work. And just attending those conversations continues to keep me in my evolution and growth and being able to see things more and more simply. So I will say her name again since I was saying it through tears to begin with. I would love to welcome to the What Moves You with Jessie podcast, Linda Pransky. Linda, thank you so much for joining me.
You know, that introduction is the best introduction I've ever gotten. Because usually when people introduce me, I think, who are they talking about? But that you introduced me in a way that it's true. That I love sharing or teaching the principles in a way that's simple, clear, and practical.
Yes.
And I find that it really helps people to be simple, clear, and practical.
Yes.
So thank you for that.
You're so welcome, Linda. Thanks for hanging in there through my tears. I had so much energy waiting for you to come on the call. I knew it was going to happen.
No, but your face was it was so nice because when you came on, your face was so bright and beautiful. And I'd just been working with somebody just before you that was just really in a depression. And then you came on completely opposite. It was really nice. Yeah,
I appreciate that.
Like two worlds. Really extreme. Yeah.
Maybe we'll send this video to them and say, this is where you're headed. This is what's possible.
Well, it was so interesting because he was so in the thick of his thinking. He was so thick with thought. And when I work with people that are depressed, I always talk about hope. Because to me, hope is a ladder. It's like a ladder that takes a person out of depression. And usually people that are even people that are depressed can relate to the word hope. And if they can relate to the feeling of that word, if they can relate to that feeling, they can just start climbing up the ladder out of depression. It's so wonderful.
Yes.
But this man he couldn't even relate to the word hope. So it's going to be interesting working with him. Yeah.
Yeah. You said to me once, no, you didn't. It wasn't to me. Obviously, it felt like it was directly to me, but it was you saying this in a video. But it impacted me incredibly. I will never forget, you were taking a call. I think you were sitting on the floor of the hospital because you were there with George when he was right in the thick of all of his, having had just had a stroke. And it was so moving for me for you to be in the middle of such a challenging experience with your husband, who you love so much. And you said, hope is a bridge to a new idea.
It is. The feeling of it. Not the idea of it, but the feeling of it. You have to get into the feeling of it.
Yes.
But I think that, any beautiful feeling people can muster up when they feel troubled, overwhelmed, up against it. Any beautiful feeling, whether it's hope or gratitude or appreciation or love or humor or whatever beautiful feeling that you can find in yourself, is a bridge to your creative process.
Yes, I can feel that.
Yeah. So what do you want to ask me?
I know, I was going to say, we just drove right in.
Yeah.
So I know you share it often, but would you be willing, because I know my audience is new to you, would you be willing to share a little bit of your origin story of the...
It will.
Okay.
So this is a very long time ago, and I'm sure many of you weren't even born yet. But this was in 1975. And my husband, George Pransky, he wasn't my husband at the time, but we worked together, and we work with people, and here's what we did. We would help them get into their trauma, into their negative experiences that bothered them, into their anger, into their emotional reactions, into their sadness, into negative emotions, to try to get them to resolve those negative emotions. That's what we did. Now, in retrospect, that seems ridiculous to me now, but that's what we did. And we really thought this was cutting edge in 1975. Well, George's partner at the time, John Enright, who was a semi-famous Gestalt therapist in San Francisco, he was always looking for new ways, new processes and techniques for working with people. He would go around the country listening to different teachers, different therapists. And he ran across a man named Sidney Banks, who he heard was really having an effect on people. And he went up to listen to Sid. Well, after he listened to Sid, he called us and said, he was very upset. He said, Sid is having an effect on people. I cannot see the process or technique, and it's driving me crazy. And you two need to come up here and see if you can see what he's doing. I cannot find out, I cannot figure out what he's doing, how he's helping people. So George and I were living in Berkeley at the time. And we got in the car and drove up to Canada, which was like, 1,200 miles or more. But we love to take road trips. So we get up there and we listen to Sid, and I'm thinking, well, this is a nice man, and I can see he's having an effect on people, but I can't understand him, and I don't care. If I can't understand what he's saying, then I'm not interested. And George was more interested in Sid at that point than I was. But Sid offended George by asking him what he was doing with people and whether he was getting results. And he asked him in a really nice way. It was very neutral. He was just curious, like, what are you doing with people? And George says, well, I'm taking them through these processes into the past, into negative emotion, to get them out of it, get them clear. And Sid said, well, does it work? And George didn't know. He didn't have an answer, and he got really upset. And we left. And on the way back, driving back, we stopped at a friend's house, Roger Mills. And we told him about Sid and told him that he was having an effect on people. We couldn't see it. And George told him the story about how he felt criticized by Sid, and how in that was just he wasn't even a psychologist. He wasn't even educated. Anyway, went home. Fast forward 6 months, we go see Roger again. And I saw a change in Roger that was striking, if not shocking, to me. And I said to Roger, what have you been doing? Because I didn't want to say, what happened to you? You're totally different in a nice way. I mean, he was different in a nice way. He was like he would never listen to me. He would listen to me. He was never thoughtful of me. He was thoughtful of me. He was never considerate of me. He was considerate of me. In other words, if I had to sum him up and, stereotype him, he was just a chauvinist, right? It just didn't respect women. And all of a sudden I felt respected. I felt seen. I felt acknowledged. I felt heard. And I'm like, what happened to you? And he told me that after we visited him 6 months ago, he started to go up to Salt Spring and listen to Sid. And then he started to talk to us about what Sid was saying, which made no sense to me. I couldn't understand what Roger was saying, but I didn't care. The fact that I saw these results in this man, this friend, I hightailed it back up to Salt Spring and sat in the front row. Now, here's the thing. Nothing happened to me. I would listen as hard as I could and nothing happened. And I'd call Roger and I'd whine at him and I'd say, Roger, nothing's happening to me. How come it happened to you and it's not happening to me? And Roger said, well, you're not listening. I said, yes, I am. I'm listening as hard as I can. And he said, well, you have to listen without thinking. And I'm like, what? Like, what do you mean listen without thinking? It's like, and then when he said that for the first time in my life, I realized I had a busy mind. It's like my mind was full of thought, but I thought that's the way it was supposed to be. You're supposed to fill your mind with thinking. That's what you did. You thought as much about everything as fast as you could to be productive and to solve things and to be creative. You just compiled thought after thought after thought after thought. And he was like, no, you can't do that. And here, you can't hear Sid that way. You have to hear him. And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you have to listen with a quiet mind. I said, well, how? Tell me how to do it. He says, I can't tell you how to do it. So I felt very stuck because I realized for the first time what a busy mind I had, but I had no idea what to do with it. I felt a victim of a busy mind. But I didn't give up. I couldn't give up. I had to find out. So I just thought, okay, I'm just going to do it. I'm going to go up there with my busy mind. I'm going to sit in the front row and I'm going to do the best I can. Well, and it took a bit of time. I just kept showing up. I just kept showing up and failing and showing up and failing. And I didn't care. I was just committed. Because it was like, I think it was my competitive nature. If Roger could get it, I could. Right? So at one point, obviously, for some reason, and I don't know how or why, my mind quieted. And I got hit with the most amazing insight that was fascinating because it was an insight that I needed. It changed me. And what it was an insight about mood because I was tormented by my moods. I would try. When I would feel a mood coming, I'd try to run away from it. And it would always get me. It would always capture me, and then I'd really drop. And I hated that experience of dropping into a mood. Well, I had an insight that released me from that whole process of torment and fear. It's not that I didn't stop having moods. I still had moods, but I wasn't bothered by them. I wasn't tormented, and I wasn't afraid of them. And it was a very simple insight that's probably not going to mean anything to anybody, because it's not the words, it was the feeling, and the understanding behind the words. But the words of the insight were that moods weren't coming at me, they were coming from me. And that just changed me. That gave me an understanding, a deep understanding that changed me. And what was interesting to me was that Sid said the same thing to everybody, and everybody had different insight. That was unique, personal, and helpful to them. So at one point, I went to Sid and I said to him, "What are you doing? What are you doing that's helping people?" He says to me, "I talk in such a way that puts a person's intellect to sleep. And then they go into a deeper level of consciousness, and then they have insight." I said, "Okay, you talk in such a way that puts people's intellect to sleep, and then they have a deeper level of consciousness and have insight." And I'm like, wow, what's that? But see, I experienced it. I had an experience of it, which seemed at the time magic. It seemed like magic to me. But see, I didn't understand that. I'll put it this way, and then I'll put it in a different way. But that people are of two minds. They have a personal mind and an impersonal mind. They have a superficial mind and a deeper mind. They have an ego, and they have wisdom. That there's something deeper in them than what they make up in terms of their beliefs and their fears and their insecurities and their habits and some of what they make up are really good habits. Like, you can make up really good habits, and you can make up really bad habits. And then there are people, we all have very similar experiences in life, but it's like for example, everybody has moods, but not everyone would react to moods the way I did. See? It's like not everybody reacts to spiders. Like, I like spiders. Some people have a panic attack it's like it's all different reactions to things that people do with their personal thinking. But it really helped me to understand levels of consciousness. It really helped me understand that your answers come, if you have a problem, your answers come from a deeper level of consciousness, not the level of consciousness that you thought them at, that you created them at. So, like when Elsie talks about being mentored by wisdom, if you have a problem and you can't solve it, you need to go to a deeper level of consciousness. And you can find that level of consciousness through a feeling. Like earlier before I came on your podcast, and I was working with this man, it was just so thick in thought that he'd lost all his feeling. And that is true suffering. And my heart just went out to him. To be that thick in thought where you lose all your feeling. Is you got to find a feeling to bring you up. You got to find an insight, something to bring you up. So what Sid did for me, which was priceless, showed me how the mind works, how mind works. It works. That we go up and down in levels of consciousness, and we get wrapped around the axle of our thinking, but then we wake up to it and get uncaught. And if we find ourselves stuck, we can go to a deeper level consciousness, mentored by mind, and find an answer. So you can become your own best friend or your own best counsel. And I think for me, in terms of being my own best counselor, what helps the most is I got to get clear on the question. Because it doesn't help me to get mentored by mind if I'm not clear on the question. If I'm not clear about what I want, what I'm looking for. Yeah. So sometimes I have to wait for that clarity of what I'm looking for or what I want.
I am incredibly quiet inside as per usual when I'm in your presence, Linda. Not great for a podcast interview.
Well, that's my story and I'm sticking to it.
Do it.
But no, I'll tell you another story. So, for lack of a better word, I became addicted to being around Sid. All I want to do is listen to him. Because when I would listen to him and get quiet, and I get into the most beautiful feeling. It was the most beautiful feeling when I would listen to him. And to be honest, I didn't even really care if I had insight. Well, the only insight I wanted was, how do I stay in this feeling 24/7? Right? But at some point I realized that it's natural and normal to go in and out. That's just the way it is, you know? I had that realization. But at some point, well, two stories. One story is, at some point, Sid asked me to be a teacher. He says, "You need to go out and teach." And I'm like, "You got to be kidding," you know? And he said, No, you need to go. I said, "Sid, I don't have anything to teach." He said, "Well, you've had insight. You teach from the feeling of your insight." I said, "I know, but I don't, it's not like, I've only had 2 or 3 insights that even though I only had 2 or 3 insights, they changed me. I had 3 insights. I had insight about relationships, I had insight about happiness, and I had insight about moods. Actually, they're pretty huge. Will you go teach those?" And I did. I did because he asked me. I never would have done it on my own, but I did it because he asked. And I was terrible. I was terrible because I was so self-conscious. I had flunked my speech class in college. I did. I flunked it because I was so self-conscious. And so I would go with my self-consciousness and I'd try to teach, and I was horrible. But I kept doing it. And you know what happened? Talking about being mentored by mind, I thought to myself, I either have to get a different relationship. I got clear. I have to have a different relationship with self-consciousness, or I have to stop doing this because it's ridiculous. This is ridiculous. I'm horrible. And my insight was, love what you hate. And I'm like, that's a stupid insight. How does a person, how do you love what you hate? Why would you even want to? See, this is, I'm talking to myself. But I thought, well, no, but it was an insight, so it must have some value. So I thought about it. I thought, well, maybe I could just feel nicer about self-consciousness. And I did. And it worked. It made to feel nicer about it, which was essentially less reactive to it. I was less self-conscious. I went, oh my goodness, that worked. If you love what you hate, it diminishes what you hate. So I was able to sort it out. I was able to go and be less conscious because I made it my friend. So that was another brilliant insight that I had. But it wasn't from being around Sid. It was from asking, being mentored by mind. So, but then the other funny story is that Sid kicked me off the island. He did. He kicked me off. He said, you need to go find this for yourself. Don't go away and don't come back. So it was like I was left on my own. And that's when the mentoring started. My own mentoring, when he kicked me off the island.
Yes.
Aw.
Oh. Are you feeling nostalgic about Sid?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Well, no, but it was the most, at the time it was shocking. Like I did something wrong or something, it was like, but it was the most generous thing to do, the kindest thing to do. It's like being thrown out of the nest, go fly on your own.
Amazing. And again, here we are where you have put words to something that I've thought of bringing this up in tea and cookies, and then I stay quiet, but I will often have an experience of something and you just sum it up in a one-liner. And just now you did it again. I used to have such a tumultuous relationship with my tears because even before my realization and my insight, I've always been very emotional when it comes to things that I feel very, that are heartfelt or that mean a lot to me. Like even doing, speeches in college, like I would just be like, oh, if something meant a lot to me and I wanted to do well and connect, it would, move me and make me quite emotional until I'd kind of get over the hump. And you just saying just now how your relationship to self-consciousness shifted. That was something for me where I kind of had this moment over the last 9 years since I've had my realization where it would still really frustrate me, especially with, having conversations with people that I adore and admire in such a, in such a meaningful way for myself. And I'd be like, for fuck's sake, Jess, get it together. Like, what are you doing? And ultimately, what happened was is that kind of clarity came to mind where I was like, you have got to have some acceptance around this because it's not a bad thing. And the more you can just accept it for yourself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Love what you hate.
Yes.
Yeah.
Love what you hate. That's what I'm saying. Your one-liners.
I had a colleague who actually she used to work for us at Pransky and Associates, and she's one of the deepest people that I knew. She's very deep in her understanding. When she would start talking, she'd always cry. As soon as you put her in front of the room, she'd start crying. And it was because she was so touched.
Yes.
And I thought that was so beautiful about how touched she would get. She gets so touched by feeling and the depth of her feeling that it would just have to come out in some way, and she'd just cry. And it was like, I mean, people had to wait a bit for her to get over it, but so what? I mean, to be touched like that, I think is a really beautiful thing.
Mm.
And it's got to come out, when you're touched like that, because your mind and your body, it's all connected. Mm-hmm. And that feeling is in your body. And it's a lot of times it just comes out in tears, not bad tears, but good tears. Yes. Like sometimes when I would listen to Sid, I would just start, and other people, this was interesting. I haven't remembered this, but sometimes when I would listen to Sid, I would start weeping, and I had no idea what I was weeping about. I had no idea why, but it was like shedding. It's really interesting. Just start weeping.
Wow.
I don't know. I just think tears get a bad rap.
I agree. Yeah. It's interesting too, because I do find because I will be moved to tears in session with clients.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of working with people 8 years ago, sometimes I'd get, it was before I'd had my realization around my tears. So I'd get a little on myself that I shouldn't be so, be so in my feelings in that way. And ultimately, I recognized that when I was in insecurity about it, then that's when it would create insecurity in the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Now, when I'm moved to tears by what's happening in a session, it impacts people in a beautiful way because we're right in a feeling together.
Oh, that's beautifully put. It's the feeling you have behind the tears that matters. And if you're comfortable crying, they're going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. Because it's always when I'm touched by what somebody is seeing, Linda.
Yes.
Because this journey is forever long as we go down the path of life and we see more and more and more. Yeah. I'm curious, have you had any insights in the last and any recent, is absolutely arbitrary, but even, do you have any insights that are kind of new and fresh that have been interesting to you and you'd like to share?
Well, here's what's interesting or puzzling to me. I know I'm different, and my work has changed. It just feels more it feels more clear, more heartfelt, felt more succinct, more obvious. And so I know I've had insight, but I don't know what. In other words, it's like sometimes you have things change, and it's like having contentless insight. Do you know what I mean by contentless insight?
Yes, doesn't come via words, it's more in a feeling.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I know my feeling has changed.
Yeah.
My feeling has changed a lot. Well, I don't know if it's a lot, but my feeling has changed. My work has changed. Things, there are certain things about the principles that feel more meaningful. Like, for example, when I think about what matters in the principles, it's what matters is resiliency.
Say more.
Well, I think that, well, I don't, I went through a period of time where when I realized what I realized about thought and how we live in thought. And when your thinking changes, your feeling changes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And my thinking changed. Like, and I had insight around it. In other words, like I remember I was one of those people that felt like positive people, there was something wrong with them. If people were very positive, I would look down on them. And I was in a group of friends that that was our culture in my friend group. We looked down on people that were positive, like they just didn't know where it was at. They were stupid. Okay. Well, I had an insight around it. I had an insight around positive, negative, and I realized that positive, negative was an arbitrary way of thinking. Like thinking negatively wasn't the truth. It was one way about going. It was one way of going about life. Being pessimistic or cynical was one way of meeting life. It wasn't the truth. And because thought and feeling were married, if you were negative, cynical, pessimistic, your feeling wouldn't be as good. If you wanted to live in a better feeling, it made more sense to be positive. That was insight. So guess what? I got kicked out of my friends group. They started looking at me like, and what's wrong with you? And I'm like, what? Well, you're being one of those people. You're being a Pollyanna. And I'm like, I am? I mean, it just seemed natural and the right way to go to be positive. Why not? So I got kicked out of my friends group. I thought that was very amusing. But see, I didn't want to be around them either, because I'd start to say something and then they'd bring it down. I'd say something that was more positive and they'd bring it down. And I'm like, why are you bringing this down? And then I realized, well, that's what I used to do, bring it down. So I changed after I had that insight. I changed. I didn't do anything to change it. I just changed after that when I saw that thinking negatively and thinking positively was arbitrary. Changed me. But now I found that I've changed, but I don't have the words. I can't tell you what happened. Well, no, I can. No, I can in a way, but it isn't. It looks more circumstantial than it does internal. Because after my husband's stroke, I had to change. I had to step up. And what I mean, I had to step up. I had to become the leader in the relationship and the leader in the business and the leader. I had to take leadership. Mm-hmm. So it's not, in a way, it's not like I had maybe the insight was I had to take leadership. Maybe that was the insight. I don't know. Might have been. Or wisdom. But it was just obvious to me that I had to step up and take leadership. And that changed me. So I do know. It's just a different kind of insight than I'm normally used to. Oh, and the other thing I had to do is that because it made sense. When I say I had to, it's because it made sense. Not that I had to, but it was like obvious. The other thing that happened is that with my husband's stroke, he became really sensitive to tone. And I'm Linda Pransky. My name is Linda, and I have a habit of impatience. Well, when a person is impatient, how it comes out is it comes out in a tone of harshness. I had to learn that. I learned that. Because I didn't know impatience comes out as harshness, but it does. Mm-hmm. And so if I got impatient with my husband, who, I mean, when you're a caregiver, you can get impatient. I mean, you just can, because it's just like, you do. But I had to learn it was very cool. I learned how to catch it and navigate it. It was very cool. So I would feel it come up. I could feel it. And then I would just sit it down. So I could feel the impatience come up. I'd wait a second, and then it would be like, I'd let it fall. It was very cool to be able to do that. And I did it for him because impatience wouldn't help when I would get impatient, it didn't help his brain for me to be impatient. It was like adding to the bruise of his brain. And I didn't want to do that. It's very clear. So I learned how to let something rise and then just let it fall. It was very cool. See, you're helping me find out, because I just didn't pay attention. Things happened and I changed, but I didn't really pay attention. to what it was. And your questions are allowing me to see. It's just I had to step up into a role of leadership, and I had to learn how to be different around impatience. It was very cool. It's so cool to be able to see a reaction come up and then pause it. It's like putting the television on pause and then just letting it fall away. Very cool.
Very cool.
So I'm very proud of myself about that. Because impatience has always been my thing. My habit that I haven't really been able to break. But then again, once I kind of realized that you have your human side and you have your deeper mind, your true self, as Elsie Spittle would call it, your true self. I stopped worrying so much about my personal mind. I kind of just let it be and not try to work on it. And now I'm going to say it stronger than that. I stopped working on it. Now, if it became something I was doing became a problem in a relationship with someone, then I'd take a look at it, like the impatience thing. It became a problem with my stroke husband. So then I changed it up. But if what I do isn't a problem, if my personal self isn't a problem in relationship, I just leave myself alone, my personal self alone. My personal self comes and goes, and I just kind of leave it rather than trying to fix myself to be a certain way in my personal mind. I don't really care about my personal mind unless it gets too loud in some way. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
Because I used to be, before I met Sid, it was all about fixing myself. I have to fix myself. Well, there is no fixing of self,
Mm-hmm.
You have what matters is what matters is that you have an experience of the impersonal mind. That's the only thing that matters really in this understanding, is that you have an experience of the impersonal mind. Really, it's the only thing that matters. And as a result of that, that's what makes you resilient. Because you get caught up and then you go back, and you get caught up and you go back. Mm-hmm. So I think that now things look very simple to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's just being appreciative of being the impersonal mind. Appreciative of that. Not trying to get there, trying to stay there, but just appreciating that you come from the impersonal mind.
And to me, that is so comforting to realize.
It is, isn't it?
Yes. Yes.
I was talking with a colleague the other day, and she was talking about how well, her husband left her all of a sudden, and it was, I mean, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but it was a break in reality. It was a surprise, and she became bereft. And I mean, that's a hard feeling, bereft, hard feeling for anyone, very hard experience to be in. And she said the only thing that would help her, she said when she would go into her impersonal mind and the feeling of it, it would just take away all of that bereavement and give her peace, which I thought was that we all can do. You know, when we all can go there when we need to.
Absolutely. God dang, Linda, can't we just do this for 10 more hours?
Well, you know what? Why don't you be selfish on tea and cookies?
Okay.
No, really, be selfish. Talk about whatever you want to talk about.
All right.
There's no rules. If you want to say, look, I want to talk about this, or I want to talk about that, or what about this? Be selfish.
All right.
Deal?
A deal. Absolutely. Thank you for the permission.
Yeah.
I do. It's just more thinking, but I do get caught up in thought around, well, I don't really have a problem to talk about, so I don't know where to go, but I sure as hell have lots of stuff I'd love to talk about.
Well, then bring it up and say, I want to talk about this.
Great.
Yeah.
Love it. Awesome. Yeah. Thank you, Linda. Thank you.
Okay.
So I have one more minute. So I have one last question that I ask everybody at the end.
Okay.
Linda Pransky, what moves you?
My husband. My husband.
And we all feel it.
Yeah. Yeah, I just think he's wonderful, and I just think he's wonderful. Oh, I gotta get off.
Yes.
What tea? I'm just checking all the. Okay. It's 10. Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Jessie.
Thank you, Linda. I know your showrunner just came in to move you along. Thank you so much, and I'll see you on Tea and Cookies.
Okay.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to What Moves You with Jessie. Let's stay connected. You can find more ideas and strategies on being human on my Instagram, @WhatMovesYouWithJessie. Sign up for my newsletter or learn more about working with me at whatmovesyouwithjessie.com. And please rate and review the show. And let us know what you think and what resonated. I read every single review. They mean so much to me. You can also call in on our hotline with your thoughts on what resonated there too. It is always live at 818-646-JESS. That's 818-646-JESS. What Moves You with Jessie is produced by Mike McGraw and Tinker City Music. Now, let's take a deep breath and give ourselves permission to live in this moment for what truly moves you.